They fined me for building a roof that could save lives. Said it didn't match the community aesthetic. Said my angles were too aggressive. That safety came second to symmetry. But I'd seen what snow can do. I'd heard the sound of a roof giving way. I wasn't about to let that happen to my family. So I built it anyway. Steep, reinforced, engineered to shed snow like an avalanche before it could bury us. Then the blizzard came. The kind they call once in a century. Roofs collapsed, homes cracked open. People begged for help. And mine stood tall, while theirs fell. Now they want to talk. Now they call me smart, but back then they called me a problem. This isn't just a story about a roof. It's about standing your ground when the world demands you stay small and silent. Because sometimes doing the right thing means breaking all their rules. And sometimes it takes a storm to prove you were right all along. You never forget the sound of a roof giving way under snow. It isn't a sudden crack like lightning or the heavy thud of a tree crashing down. It's slower, more deliberate, a deep, mournful groan, as if the house itself is sighing its last breath. I heard it once 10 years ago in a small town 2 valleys over. A family of 4 was inside. Only the father crawled out alive. The newspaper photos were blurry, but the details burned into me 2 little girls the same ages as the daughters I didn't yet have. That sound followed me like a warning. When Amanda and I bought our home 8 years ago on the edge of Golden Timber Estates in northern Colorado, I made one non-negotiable demand to the builder the roof would be built my way. I didn't have an architect's stamp on paper, but I had 22 years in the Army Corps of Engineers. Most of them in high-altitude posts, some in combat zones, where the shelter overhead was the thin line between living and not. I knew what heavy wet snow could do when it decided to stay. I sketched the design myself on graph paper in the dim light of our temporary apartment, a steep 43-degree pitch standing seam metal, in a quiet silver tone reinforced trusses rated for twice the county's maximum snow load requirement, and strategically placed snow guards to release the weight in controlled sheets instead of dangerous slabs. It wouldn't match the gentle uniform slopes of every other house in the neighborhood, but it would stand when everything else bowed. The builder raised an eyebrow. The HOA might have something to say about that. I told him the HOA could say whatever it wanted. My family's safety wasn't up for a vote. When the panels went up, the roof caught the morning sun like polished steel. On the first real snowfall of that winter, I stood in the backyard with a mug of coffee gone cold listening. A soft rhythmic whisper rose from the eaves as the snow let go in long, graceful curtains. Shush, shush, shush. Landing in neat piles far from the foundation. No icicles daggered down. No ominous creaking from the attic. Just clean release. Amanda came out in her robe, hair still tousled from sleep, and slipped her arms around my waist. It's beautiful, she whispered, breath fogging in the frigid air. And it feels safe. Our girls, Molly and Lucy, then 4 and 6, pressed their noses to the window and squealed at the snow waterfalls. They had no idea how close danger could come on a quiet winter night. I intended to keep it that way. For the first couple of years, the neighborhood left us alone. Greg Hastings, who lived across the cul-de-sac, even clapped me on the shoulder one afternoon while we shoveled driveways side by side. Smart move, Garrett, he said, nodding toward my gleaming roof. After the last few winters, I might steal your idea one day. I smiled and told him he was welcome to the blueprints. Then spring arrived, and with it a new HOA board president, Karen Delaney. She appeared one March afternoon in a sharp red coat that stood out like a warning flag against the melting snow. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched in her perfectly styled hair despite the overcast sky, she marched up our driveway as if she owned it. Just conducting routine aesthetic inspections, she announced with a smile that never reached her eyes. We've had a few comments about inconsistencies. I leaned on my shovel. Inconsistencies. She gestured vaguely at the roofline. The pitch and material deviate from the community's approved palette. The CC&Rs are quite clear on visual uniformity. I kept my voice even. The CC&Rs don't mention snow load engineering or structural safety. My roof meets and exceeds every county code. Her pen tapped the clipboard. County codes aren't our concern. Community standards are. I felt the old familiar calm settle over me, the kind I'd worn in briefings before dangerous missions. Ma'am, this roof was designed to keep my family alive in a blizzard. I'm happy to share the calculations if the board wants to review them. She offered that thin smile again. We'll be in touch. 2 weeks later, the certified letter arrived, thick envelope, bold, HOA seal, the kind that feels heavier than paper has any right to be. Inside, a formal violation notice citing unapproved roof structure, a demand to submit a redesign plan within 30 days, and the threat of a $2,500 fine. Amanda read it over my shoulder and let out a slow, disbelieving breath. They're serious. They are, I said. She touched the silver edge of the roof, visible through the kitchen window as if checking it was still there. You warned them. You told her straight to her face. I did. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into a new manila folder. But facts don't matter when someone's more interested in control than safety. That night, after the girls were asleep, I pulled out my old Army field manuals, the rolled blueprints, and every photo I'd taken during construction. I started a log dates, snowfall totals, temperature swings, time-stamped images of clean sheds versus the ice dams already forming on neighboring gutters. Amanda watched me label the tabs. You think it'll come to a fight? I met her eyes. I know it will. And when it does, we'll be ready. Outside, the last patches of snow melted from my roof hours before they vanished from anyone else's. Clean, silent, unapologetic. I listened to the quiet drip from the eaves and felt the old resolve harden in my chest. Let them send their letters. Let them quote their rules. This roof and everything under it was mine to protect. The certified letter sat on the kitchen island like an unwelcome guest. I didn't open it right away. I set my boots by the door, hung my coat, and poured a fresh cup of coffee, letting the steam curl up and fog the window. Only then did I slit the envelope with a butter knife. 4 crisp pages, slid-out violation notice, grainy photos of our roof taken from across the street, and an invoice stamped in red, to $500 due upon receipt. Amanda came in from the laundry room, arms full of warm towels. She stopped when she saw my face. They actually did it, she said, voice low, so the girls wouldn't hear from the living room. I handed her the pages. She read in silence, lips tightening with every paragraph. When she reached the part about forced corrective action by HOA-appointed contractors, her knuckles went white around the paper. You told Karen about the snow risk. You told her to her face. I did. I took the letter back and smoothed it flat. But she's not interested in risk. She's interested in obedience. Amanda set the towels down and leaned against the counter. Outside, meltwater dripped steadily from our eaves, clear, rhythmic, almost musical, while heavier clumps thudded from the neighbors' gutters. The contrast felt like a quiet accusation. So what do we do? She asked. I looked past her to the backyard where Molly and Lucy were building a lopsided snowman, cheeks pink laughter carrying through the glass. My chest tightened at the thought of anyone forcing me to replace the one thing standing between them, and a collapse like the one I'd never forgotten. We fight, I said, but smart. We document everything. That evening, after the girls were in bed, I turned the garage into a war room. I unrolled the original blueprints across the workbench weights on each corner to keep them flat. Beside them, I laid out laminated copies of the county permits, the stamped engineering calculations, and a growing stack of photographs before, during, and after every snowfall since we'd moved in. I added a new section, time-lapse stills from the security camera showing clean, even releases of snow while neighboring roofs sagged under thickening blankets. Amanda brought me a second mug of coffee and stood watching. You're treating this like a deployment. Because it is, I said. Only the enemy wears lipstick and carries a clipboard. She gave a small, sad laugh. I thought neighborhood fights were about dogs barking or Christmas lights staying up too long. Me too. I capped a marker and looked at her. But I'm not gambling with your lives for the sake of matching shingles. She reached over and squeezed my forearm. I know, just don't let it eat you alive, okay? I nodded, but we both knew it already had. A month later, the second letter arrived, this one heavier, angrier. The fine was now attached, and the tone had sharpened 30 days to comply or face legal escalation and forced correction at homeowner's expense. I was in the driveway scraping ice when the mail truck stopped. The envelope felt thick with threat. I carried it inside and laid it on the table without a word. Amanda opened it this time. Her shoulders sagged as she read. They're threatening to tear it down themselves. I stared out the window. Fresh snow had started again, light dry flakes drifting lazily. On our roof, they barely lingered before whispering down the slope in delicate veils. On Greg Hastings's roof across the street, they were already piling against the chimney. "Let them try," I said quietly. Amanda turned to me, eyes shining with a mix of fear and fury. "Garrett, this could get expensive. Lawyer's court." "I know." I pulled her into my arms. She smelled like vanilla and the cold air that still clung to her sweater. "But expensive is still cheaper than a funeral." She pressed her face into my shoulder for a long moment. When she pulled back, her voice was steady. "Then we do this together." The next morning, I drove to the county planning office and requested certified copies of every document related to our build. I paid extra for expedited stamps. Back home, I scanned everything, backed it up to 3 separate drives, and printed 2 full sets. One stayed in the fireproof safe. One went into a binder labeled simply Evidence. I started a daily log temperature snowfall accumulation, measured with a ruler on the back deck, attic humidity readings from the digital sensor I'd installed, comparative photos of neighboring roofs versus ours. It felt obsessive, but I'd learned long ago that battles are won in the preparation phase, not the panic. Some evenings, Amanda found me at the kitchen table, long after dinner, annotating weather reports or cross-referencing old Army snowload tables. She'd set a plate of cookies beside me without comment, kiss the top of my head, and leave me to it. One night, Lucy wandered in, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, why do you have so many pictures of our roof?" I lifted her onto my lap. "Because it's special," I told her. "It keeps the snow from sitting too long and getting too heavy. Like a slide for snow." She considered this small brow furrowed, "So it protects us." "Exactly." She wrapped her arms around my neck. "Then I love our roof." I held her tighter than necessary. Word began to spread through the neighborhood quietly, the way gossip always does. A few neighbors stopped waving. June Halstead, who used to trade recipes with Amanda over the fence, suddenly found reasons to be inside when Amanda walked past. Greg Hastings shoveled his driveway with his back to ours. The chill wasn't just outside anymore. But every morning, I stepped onto the back porch, coffee in hand, and watched the first light catch the metal panels. Snow released in gentle waves, landing soft and harmless below. The sound was different every time, sometimes a hushed sigh, sometimes a low rush like distant surf, but always the same promise: I will not hold what I cannot carry. And that promise held me steady while the letters kept coming. The HOA meetings were held in the community center, a low beige building that smelled faintly of old coffee and artificial pine cleaner. Folding chairs scraped across the linoleum floor as homeowners trickled in, murmuring about property values and upcoming holiday decorations. I arrived early, boots still damp from shoveling the driveway, the thick binder tucked under my arm like body armor. Karen Delaney sat at the long plastic table at the front, red blazer immaculate, flanked by 2 board members who looked as though they'd rather be anywhere else. A handful of neighbors filled the first few rows. June Halstead, with her knitting, Greg Hastings scrolling his phone, a few others I recognized but didn't know by name. Most avoided my eyes. Karen tapped her pen twice, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "We'll move to violation appeal number 14B, filed by Garrett Weller, lot 76. I stood and walked to the open space in front of the table. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. I could feel the weight of every gaze, some curious, some already hostile. "My name is Garrett Weller," I began, voice steady. "I'm here to contest the fine and violation regarding my roof. It was engineered specifically for heavy snow loads, built with full county permits, and has performed exactly as designed for 8 years. I opened the binder and slid copies across the table. Blueprints, load calculations, permit stamps. Photos of clean snow release beside neighbors' ice-dammed gutters. Karen didn't touch the documents. She folded her hands and offered the same practiced smile she'd worn on my driveway months earlier. "Mr. Weller, this board is not an engineering review panel. Our mandate is aesthetic uniformity and community standards as outlined in the CCNRs." I kept my tone even. "With respect, those standards don't account for the realities of living in northern Colorado. A roof that looks uniform but can't shed snow endangers lives." One of the men beside her, Tom, I think his name was, finally glanced at the photos. He lingered on an image of Greg Hastings's gutter sagging under a thick shelf of ice last February. Karen leaned forward. "Safety is the county's jurisdiction. Our concern is visual harmony. Your roof creates an unacceptable precedent." I felt heat rise in my chest, but I kept it leashed. precedent for what keeping families safe. A few murmurs rippled through the small audience. June Halstead's knitting needles paused. Greg shifted in his seat. Karen's smile thinned. For allowing every homeowner to ignore approved materials and designs. We can't have a patchwork neighborhood. I turned slightly to face the rows of chairs. This isn't about patchwork. It's about not burying my daughters under a collapse like the one in Elkhorn Ridge. In 2012, 2 little girls didn't make it out. I won't risk that for the sake of matching shingles. The room went very quiet. Someone in the back cleared their throat. Karen recovered quickly. Emotional appeals don't change covenants, Mr. Weller. Do you have an approved redesign plan to submit? No, I said. Because the roof I have is the right one. But under Section 5.2 of the CC&Rs, I'm formally requesting an external independent review. Her pen stopped mid-tap. She hadn't expected the clause. That process is lengthy and carries additional fees. I'm aware, I said. I'm prepared to pay them. She scribbled something lips tight. Request noted. The fine remains in effect pending review. Meeting adjourned. Chairs scraped again as people stood. No one approached me. A few neighbors offered Karen sympathetic glances as they filed past her table. Greg gave me a quick, awkward nod, nothing more before heading for the exit. Outside, the night air was sharp with coming frost. I stood on the community center steps and watched taillights disappear down the plowed road. My breath clouded in front of me. The binder felt heavier on the way home. Amanda was waiting up reading on the couch under a quilt the girls had picked out years ago. She closed the book when I came in. How bad? About as expected, I said, hanging my coat. They didn't look at the evidence. Karen shut it down. She patted the cushion beside her. I sat suddenly bone-tired. She rested her head on my shoulder. They'll come around when they see reason, she said softly. I stared at the dark window where our roof's silhouette cut a sharp, defiant line against the stars. I'm not sure reason is what they're looking for. The next weeks brought a subtle shift like the first thin layer of ice forming on a pond. Conversations at mailboxes ended abruptly when I approached. June Halstead, who used to wave enthusiastically whenever Amanda pushed the stroller past, now busied herself with her roses, even in winter. Greg Hastings shoveled his driveway in silence, earbuds in back turned. The girls noticed first. Lucy came home from school one afternoon, lower lip trembling. Emily said her mom told her not to play at our house anymore because Daddy's being mean to the neighborhood. Amanda knelt to her level, smoothing her hair. That's not true, sweetheart. Daddy's just trying to keep us safe. Molly, quieter, watched from the hallway with wide eyes. That night, I lay awake listening to the house settle. The faint creak of trusses, the soft tick of cooling metal from the roof. Everything solid, everything sound. But outside our walls, something was fracturing. I began to feel it in small, deliberate ways. A car slowing as it passed our house headlights, lingering on the roofline. Anonymous notes slipped into our mailbox. Nothing overt, just printed pages of the CC&R sections highlighted in yellow. Once a real estate flyer for comparable homes in nearby subdivisions appeared under our wiper blade, circled prices significantly higher than ours. Amanda tried to laugh it off. They think we'll get scared and sell. I didn't laugh. They're hoping we'll get tired. She reached across the bed and took my hand. Are you? I thought about the girls' confused faces. About the silence spreading like frost. About the memory of that long-ago groan of failing timber. No, I said into the dark. I'm just getting started. Outside, a light snow began to fall, dry crystals, ticking softly against the window. I listened as they touched the metal roof and vanished, almost instantly carried away in a faint, silvery whisper. The house stood firm. But the neighborhood had begun to close ranks, and for the first time since we'd moved in, I felt the chill seeping through the walls. The county annex building sat 3 towns over, half buried in dirty snowplow ridges, its tan brick looking exhausted under the January sky. I arrived 20 minutes early, boots crunching across the salted parking lot, the heavy binder under my arm, now thick with additional tabs, weather logs from the past 3 winters, correspondence with the HOA, even a letter from the retired city engineer who had walked our build site and called the roof textbook perfect for this elevation. Inside the hearing room was smaller than I expected, 1 long table, 3 chairs behind it, 1 lone folding chair in front. It smelled faintly of bleach and old paper. The independent review committee consisted of 2 retired contractors and a former zoning board member, people whose hands showed years of real work, not clipboards. Karen Delaney was already there, standing by the window in a severe black suit, arms crossed. She didn't acknowledge me when I entered. I took the single chair and laid the binder on my lap like a shield. The chairperson, a weathered man named Mr. Alvarez, cleared his throat. "We'll give each side 15 minutes. Ms. Delaney, you may begin." Karen stepped forward with a slim poster board under her arm. She propped it on a small easel, a collage of neighborhood homes, all gentle brown shingles, uniform pitches, then a single-color print of our silver roof glaring beside them like an intruder. She spoke smoothly rehearsed. Words like visual cohesion, property value, integrity, original development, vision. She talked about precedent, about the slippery slope of allowing deviations. She never once mentioned snow weight structural failure or the word safety. When she finished, she sat with the posture of someone who believed the room was already hers. Mr. Alvarez nodded to me, Mr. Weller. I stood feeling the familiar calm settle over me, the same stillness I'd known before briefings in far worse places. My name is Garrett Weller. I'm a father of 2 young daughters, a homeowner in good standing for 8 years, and a retired combat engineer with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I let that land for a beat. I designed my roof after studying the 2012 collapse in Elkhorn Ridge that took the lives of a mother and her 2 daughters. I promised myself that if I ever raised a family in snow country, I would not leave their safety to chance or to aesthetics. I opened the binder and walked them through the evidence slowly, deliberately. First, the blueprint's pitch angles circled in red. Then load charts comparing historic snowfall data against my truss ratings. Photos of neighboring gutters bowed under ice, while ours stayed clean. Time-stamped stills of snow releasing in even controlled waves. I pointed to a thermal image taken the same night on 2 adjacent homes. My attic stayed consistently below freezing, no melt, no refreeze, no ice dams. My neighbor's attic warmed enough to create cycles of drip and freeze. That's how dams form. That's how weight builds unseen until it's too late. Ms. Lopez, the former zoning board member, leaned forward studying the thermal prints. Impressive data, Mr. Weller. Did the HOA receive any of this prior to issuing fines? I submitted an outline before construction. No response for 6 weeks. By then the roof was up and fully permitted by the county. Karen shot to her feet. He circumvented proper approval channels, that alone. Ma'am, Mr. Alvarez interrupted firmly. Your time has concluded. She sat, cheeks flushed. The quiet contractor on the end, Mr. Jensen, spoke for the first time. What exactly are you asking the committee to do, Mr. Weller? I'm asking that the violation be overturned and the fine rescinded, I said. This roof complies with and exceeds every relevant safety code. It poses no hazard to neighboring properties. In fact, it reduces risk to the entire street by preventing the kind of catastrophic slides that have damaged homes here in past storms. I closed the binder. One day, we may face a blizzard that makes previous winters look mild. When that day comes, I want to know my daughters are sleeping under something that will hold. I'm asking you to let it stand. Silence filled the small room. Mr. Alvarez thanked us both and asked us to step outside while they deliberated. Karen left first, heels clicking sharp against the tile. I followed a minute later. We stood in the narrow hallway without speaking. Fluorescent light buzzed overhead. Snow tapped softly against the high window. Finally, she turned. You're wasting everyone's time. I met her eyes. No, I'm spending mine to protect what matters most. She gave a short, dismissive laugh and looked away. 10 minutes later, the door opened. Mr. Alvarez appeared. We've reached a decision. It will be emailed within 10 business days. I nodded. Karen brushed past me without another word. Driving home, the sky hung low and iron gray. Flakes began to fall, fat, wet ones that stuck to the windshield before the wipers could sweep them away. I turned onto our street and slowed as I approached the house. The roof caught the weak light, a clean silver line against the darkening clouds. Amanda met me at the door, eyes searching my face. Molly and Lucy hovered behind her, clutching handmade cards covered in crayon snowflakes. Well, Amanda asked. They listened, I said, hanging my coat. Whether they'll rule wisely, we'll know soon. She pulled me into a hug. The girls wrapped around my legs. Daddy, we drew pictures for the judge people, Lucy said, holding up a page with a big triangle roof and stick figure family underneath. So they know it's good. I knelt and kissed both their foreheads. Thank you, sweethearts. That might be the best evidence yet. That night, I added the hearing notes to the binder and backed up the new photos. Outside, the snow deepened, muffling the world. I stood at the window a long time watching it settle on neighbors' roofs in thick, uneven layers, while ours remained pristine. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt the weight of waiting. Because Karen wasn't finished. 3 days later, another glossy envelope arrived, HOA seal bold and centered Karen's name and title in the return corner. Inside a single page. Regardless of the pending committee ruling, your structure remains in violation of visual uniformity clauses. You are ordered to remove the non-compliant roof within 30 days or face lien placement and court action. Amanda read it over my shoulder and whispered, "They're jumping the gun." "They are," I said, "and that's a mistake." I called the committee liaison the next morning. She confirmed no final ruling yet, and the HOA had no authority to act unilaterally until it was issued. She emailed me written confirmation within the hour. That same afternoon, I retained David Hirsch, a local attorney whose quiet demeanor hid a spine of steel. I handed him the entire binder, the new letter, and the liaison's email. "Classic overreach," he said, scanning the documents. "I'll draft a cease and desist today." By evening, Karen had to sign for the certified delivery herself. 2 days after that, the committee's email arrived. Fine nullified. Violation overturned. Roof compliant and safe. We read it together at the kitchen table. Amanda's hand found mine and squeezed hard. The girls danced around us when we told them Daddy won. For one brief evening, we let ourselves believe the fight was over. But across the street, curtains twitched. Engines slowed as they passed our house. And somewhere Karen was already planning her next move. The storm inside the neighborhood hadn't broken yet. It was only gathering strength. The victory lasted exactly 3 days. On the third morning, a plain white envelope slid through the mail slot. No glossy stock, this time. No bold HOA seal. Just a single sheet from the county small claims court. Karen Delaney had sued me personally for willful violation of private covenants and diminishment of community property values. She was asking the judge to uphold the original fine and order immediate roof replacement at my expense. David Hirsch read the filing over speakerphone, while I stood in the garage staring at the binder that had grown thicker than a field manual. "She's trying to end-run the independent review committee," he said. "Small claims moves fast, and some judges lean toward upholding HOAs on principle. But she's also handed us ammunition, her preemptive letter and this timing show bad faith. So we fight again. We counter-sue for harassment and abusive process," he replied, "and we document every new pressure point." The pressure points came quickly. First, the anonymous complaints, a notice for failure to shovel sidewalk within 24 hours, even though I'd cleared it at dawn. Another for an unauthorized exterior light fixture that had been there since move-in day. A third for mailbox showing signs of wear after I'd repainted it the previous summer. Each arrived as a photocopied form with no signature, just the HOA letterhead. Then the unmarked gray SUV began appearing across the street, always around school bus time, always idling long enough to watch our front door. The tint was too dark to see the driver. I noted the plate in my log, ran it through an online lookup registered to a leasing company, no individual name. Amanda started jumping at every engine noise. The girls asked why the shadow car kept coming back. One afternoon, Lucy came home from school and whispered, "Some kid said Daddy's making the whole neighborhood ugly and we should move." Amanda's eyes filled, but she kept her voice light. "People sometimes say silly things when they're scared of something new, honey." That night, I upgraded the security system, 4 new motion-activated cameras with cloud backup floodlights on every corner. A louder chime at the door. I tested the angles myself, climbing the ladder in the cold until I could see every approach. Amanda watched from below, arms wrapped around herself. "Garrett, do we need all this?" "We need to know who's watching," I said. "And we need proof if they cross a line." She didn't argue. The line was crossed on a Friday evening just after dusk. I was helping Molly with spelling words at the kitchen table when Amanda called me to the front window. Fresh red spray paint glistened on the garage door and the side of the shed facing the alley. "Ruin or get out, conform or leave." The letters were jagged, hurried, still dripping in the porch light. Molly and Lucy stood behind us, small hands clutching our legs. Lucy started to cry quietly. Amanda's voice shook. "Who would do this to us?" I pulled out my phone and photographed everything from multiple angles before the paint could dry. Then I called the non-emergency police line. 2 officers arrived within the hour, young, polite, but already weary of neighborhood disputes. They took statements, snapped more pictures, promised extra patrols. As their cruiser pulled away, I stood in the driveway with Amanda, the cold biting through my sweater. The paint smelled sharp and chemical, like fresh anger. "I want to take the girls to my sister's for a while," she said. "Just until this calms." I nodded, throat tight. "That's probably best." She searched my face. "Come with us." I looked up at the roof, silver panels catching the moonlight, untouched, unapologetic. Then at the ugly red scrawl defacing our home. "I can't," I said. "If I leave now, they win. And I won't let them think fear works." She rested her forehead against my chest. "I hate this." "I know." I wrapped my arms around her. "But I hate the idea of replacing that roof with something that could kill you more." The next morning, I pressure washed the paint until only faint shadows remained, then repainted the entire garage door, a fresh coat of the approved beige. Slow, deliberate strokes, every pass a reminder of what I was refusing to surrender. David filed our counterclaim that afternoon: harassment, malicious prosecution, intentional infliction of emotional distress. We attached the police report, photos of the vandalism, camera stills of the lingering SUV, and copies of every baseless complaint. Karen's response came via email to the entire neighborhood listserv, carefully worded, of course. The HOA regrets any distress caused by isolated acts of expression, but cannot be held responsible for individual homeowner frustrations. Expression. That was what she called terrorizing a family. Amanda packed that weekend. The girls thought it was an adventure, sleepovers with cousins, Aunt Claire's famous pancakes. They hugged me extra hard at the door. "Keep the roof safe, Daddy," Molly whispered. "I will," I promised. Amanda lingered last. She touched my cheek, eyes red but steady. "Call me every night, and if anything else happens, I'll come get you immediately." She kissed me long and fierce, then climbed into the car. I stood in the driveway until their taillights disappeared around the corner. The house felt cavernous that night. I walked room to room, turning on lights, listening to the silence where laughter and bedtime stories usually lived. In the girls' room, I straightened Lucy's stuffed penguin and Molly's drawing of our super roof still taped to the wall. Then I went to the kitchen window and looked out. The gray SUV was parked under the street lamp, again engine off, headlights dark. I didn't move, just stared until 10 minutes later it pulled away slowly. I added the timestamp to the log. Outside, the temperature dropped hard. The forecast shifted overnight, meteorologists talking about a potentially historic system barreling down from the Arctic. Feet of snow. Whiteout conditions. Power outages likely. I stocked the generator, checked the propane, laid in extra food and water. Old habits from deployments die hard. As I sealed the last bin in the garage, my phone buzzed with a weather alert. Blizzard warning, 36-60 inches expected, travel impossible after Tuesday. I looked up at the roof one more time. Moonlight slid across the metal like liquid silver. Let it come, I thought. Whatever storm was coming, snow or human, I was ready. The house stood quiet around me, solid and waiting. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel alone. I felt fortified. The storm arrived sooner than the forecasters predicted. Monday night, the flakes began as harmless, confetti light dry dancing under the street lamps. By Tuesday morning, they had thickened into something heavier, wetter, driven sideways by a wind that rattled the windows like an impatient fist. The radio called it a multi-day event of historic proportions. Schools closed, flights canceled. The governor urged everyone to stay home. Amanda called from her sister's house south of Denver, voice tight with worry. "You're sure you won't come down? The roads are still open for now." I stood at the kitchen window watching the world vanish behind a curtain of white. "The house is ready," I told her. "Generator-fueled, pantry stocked, cameras running. I need to be here if anything happens." A long pause. "If anything happens to the roof." "No," I said softly. "If anything happens to the others." She knew what I meant. "Just promise you'll check in every few hours." "I promise." The girls got on the phone next, chattering about snowball fights with their cousins. Molly made me swear to take pictures of our roof being a hero. Lucy wanted to know if the chickens were warm enough. I told them yes, the coop was insulated and the heat lamp glowing red like a little sun. After I hung up, the house felt larger and quieter than ever. I brewed coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, pulled on my heavy parka, and stepped outside to check the generator shed. The wind hit like a wall, stealing my breath. Snow already ankle-deep swirled around my boots. I secured the vents, tested the pull start smooth eager, and went back in. By noon, visibility had dropped to 20 feet. The cul-de-sac disappeared. Houses became vague shapes behind veils of white. Power flickered once, twice, then held. I fired up the generator anyway for a test run. Its low hum became a steady heartbeat under the floorboards. I spent the afternoon in the living room with the curtains open, laptop on my knees, cycling through the security feeds. Across the street, Greg Hastings' roof had already gathered a thick, even blanket, no shedding at all. June Halstead's gentle pitch looked like a loaded shelf. Karen's flat-topped garage wore a growing crown of white. My own roof stayed remarkably clean. Every hour or so, a section would release in a soft rolling wave. Like distant surf sending sheets sliding harmlessly to the ground far from the foundation. The sound was soothing, almost hypnotic. Night fell early, swallowed by the storm. Wind screamed around the eaves, but the house didn't flinch. I ate chili straight from the pot, then settled at the kitchen table with a thermos of coffee and the camera feeds on the big monitor. At 11:47 p.m., the power grid finally surrendered. Lights across the neighborhood winked out one by one. My generator kicked in seamlessly. The house glowed like a lone lantern in the blizzard. I texted Amanda, "Power out here, generator running fine, all good." She replied instantly, "Thank God, love you, stay warm." Outside, the wind rose to a shriek that made the windows flex. Snow hammered the glass in relentless waves. I pulled a chair to the front window and watched the whiteout, the world reduced to swirling chaos. Around 2:30 a.m., I dozed off in the recliner, waking every hour to check gauges and feeds. At 3:14 a.m., the first distant crack echoed through the storm sharp, then a deeper grinding groan as something gave way. I bolted upright and pulled up the cameras. Lot 83, the Daltons. Their back deck roof had collapsed under a massive drift. The wooden beams lay twisted like matchsticks, half buried in a mound of snow the size of a pickup truck. 10 minutes later, another feed caught movement. On Lot 82, the gutter tore free with a metallic scream, pulling a section of fascia down in a slow avalanche. My roof remained clear, the pitch doing its quiet, relentless work. I logged the timestamps, heart pounding harder than I wanted to admit. By 5 a.m., 3 more structures had failed: a pergola, a shed, June Halstead's beloved sunroom, its glass panes shattering outward in a glittering spray as the weight finally won. I suited up and stepped outside just after dawn. The wind had eased to a steady moan, but the snow still fell thick and heavy. The air smelled metallic electric. Every surface was buried. Only roof lines and the tops of cars gave any hint of what lay beneath. I waded through thigh-deep drifts to the street. The neighborhood looked like a foreign planet, silent, sculpted alien. My house stood out starkly, walls buried to the windows, but the roof gleaming almost clean silver metal, catching the faint gray light. Then I heard it, a thin, desperate voice cutting through the hush. "Help somebody, please." The sound came from Karen Delaney's driveway. I followed the cry boots, plunging deep with every step. There she was, knee-deep in snow, frantically digging at the collapsed awning over her garage with a plastic snow shovel. Her luxury sedan was trapped beneath twisted metal, and a mountain of white rear window shattered. She turned when my shadow fell across her. Her face was pale, lips, blue hair plastered to her cheeks under a sodden knit hat. "Garrett," she gasped. "The awning, do you have tools? A better shovel." I looked past her to the main roof. Snow had piled dangerously high against the western slope, the shallow pitch refusing to release. The gutters sagged ominously. "You need to get that weight off the house roof first," I said. She stared up as if seeing it for the first time. Her breath hitched. "Please," she whispered, "can you help me?" I thought of every letter, every threat, every red-painted word on my garage. I thought of Amanda and the girls 2 hours away, safe because I'd refused to bend. Then I thought of the sound a roof makes when it decides it's carried enough. I handed her my long-handled aluminum shovel. "Start at the lower edge. Work in small sections." She took it with trembling hands. "I'll get the extension ladder and the roof rake," I said. "Because some lines you don't cross even when the person on the other side spent months trying to force you over them." As I turned back toward my house, another distant groan rolled through the frozen air, followed by the heavy crash of surrender. The storm wasn't finished, and neither was I. The ladder creaked under my weight. As I climbed toward Karen's roof, the aluminum rungs iced and slick despite my gloved grip. Wind still gusted in sharp bursts, flinging snow into my face like needles. Below, Karen stood ankle-deep in the drift, clutching the shovel I'd given her, eyes fixed upward, as if the sky itself might fall next. I paused at the eaves and surveyed the damage waiting to happen. Snow had piled in an uneven ridge along the western slope, wet, dense, easily 3 feet deep, in places cemented by a crust of ice near the chimney. The shallow pitch had trapped it all, turning her roof into a loaded spring. One warm spell, one more heavy fall, and it would go. Start from the bottom edge, I called down. Small sections. Don't try to take it all at once. She nodded mutely and began scraping at the lower overhang, her movements, frantic at first, then slower as exhaustion set in. I moved methodically across the shingles roof rake in hand, chopping and pulling in careful layers. Each controlled release sent a heavy sheet cascading down with a muffled whoomp, showering Karen below. She yelped the first time, stumbling back, then steadied herself and kept working. 2 hours bled away like that, me on the roof, her on the ground. The only sounds are labored breathing and the occasional groan of shifting snow. My shoulders burned. Sweat froze against my skin beneath layers of wool and Gore-Tex. But section by section, the deadly weight came off. At one point, a larger slab broke loose all at once. It roared down the slope like a frozen wave and crashed at the foundation with a boom that shook snow from the nearby trees. Karen dropped the shovel and covered her head. I froze, heart-hammering, waiting for the telltale crack of failing trusses. None came. When the roof was finally clear enough to hold for now, I climbed down. My boots hit the drift with a soft crunch. Karen stood there, cheeks raw from cold eyes, red-rimmed and unreadable. "Thank you," she said, voice hoarse. I nodded once. "Get inside before you freeze." She hesitated, then disappeared through her front door without another word. I was barely back in my own driveway when Greg Hastings appeared, trudging through the snow like a man wading upstream. His parka was half-zipped, face flushed, eyes wide. "Garrett, my roof's sagging bad, leaking in 2 rooms already. I've got buckets catching water, but..." He trailed off, looking ashamed. "Could you take a look?" I glanced at Karen's house, then at the sky, still spitting snow, though lighter now. The neighborhood sounded like a battlefield. Distant cracks, shouts, the occasional heavy crash as another structure surrendered. "Yeah," I said, "let's go." Greg's roof was worse than I'd feared. The gentle pitch had allowed snow to pack against the chimney and dormers, creating drifts deep enough to bow the ridge beam. Water dripped steadily through the living room ceiling, staining the pale drywall dark. I climbed his ladder, shakier than mine, and spent the next hour raking and shoveling while Greg fed me tools from below. We worked in near silence at first, just the scrape of metal on snow and our breathing. Halfway through, he finally spoke. "I should have listened to you." I paused, rake mid-pull. "You did what you thought was right at the time." "No," he said bitterly. "I did what was easy. I didn't want to be the next one fined. Didn't want the stares." He looked up at me, snowflakes catching in his lashes. "I'm sorry, man, for all of it." I met his eyes. "Clear this roof first, then we'll talk." We finished just as the first emergency vehicles arrived, fire department snowcats and rescue sleds, carving slow paths through the buried streets. They moved house to house, red tagging the worst 4 homes, officially uninhabitable, 8 more, with serious structural damage. One collapse had punched through a nursery ceiling. The crib lay crushed, though mercifully, the baby had been with grandparents. Everywhere I looked, shallow roofs sagged or gaped open like broken jaws. Gutters hung twisted. Decks lay flattened. And in the center of it all, my house stood, defiant roof, gleaming walls buried but intact. A fire lieutenant paused in front of it, on his way past, neck craned upward. "That's a smart design," he called. "You an engineer?" "Used to be," I said. He gave a tired grin. "Wish more folks around here had listened to someone like you." By late afternoon, the snow had tapered to flurries. Exhaustion settled into my bones like wet cement. But I kept moving, helping Greg board a cracked window, checking June Halstead's sunroom damage from the ground, lending my roof rake to the McCaffreys so they could free their buried SUV. Word spread slowly through the frozen neighborhood. People emerged from their homes in 1s and 2s, bundled figures against the white, staring at the devastation. Many stopped when they saw me, eyes flicking from the wreckage around them to my untouched roof and back again. No one spoke at first, just quiet nods. A few murmured thank you when I handed over tools. Dusk fell early, the sky a dull pewter. I trudged home through knee-deep snow boots, heavy muscles screaming. Inside, the generator still hummed faithfully. I peeled off layers, made coffee that tasted like heaven, and collapsed at the kitchen table with the camera feeds. My roof had continued its quiet work all day, releasing fresh accumulation in steady, graceful sheets. The footage looked almost serene, silver panels shedding white in rhythmic waves while everything around buckled. I texted Amanda a short video clip. She replied instantly, with a string of crying, laughing emojis and hearts. Then, the girls say their roof is the strongest in the world. I smiled for the first time in days. Later that night, long after the emergency crews had retreated and the neighborhood lay hushed under new quiet, a soft knock sounded at my front window. I opened the door to find Karen on the porch, bundled in a coat too thin for the cold cheeks pale. She held a single folded sheet of heavy stationery. Wordlessly, she handed it to me. I unfolded it under the porch light. A formal letter of resignation from the HOA presidency, effective immediately. Her eyes were hollow. "They're already blaming me," she said, voice barely above the wind, "for pushing the uniformity rules, for not listening." I waited. "I didn't think it would ever get this bad," she whispered. "I thought you were just being difficult." I looked past her to her house roof, cleared but scarred, then back to the paper in my hand. "You weren't the only one who didn't listen," I said. She nodded once, a small broken movement, then turned and walked back through the snow footprints, filling almost as fast as she made them. I closed the door and stood in the quiet warmth. Outside, the storm had finally spent itself. Inside, something else had just begun to break. Morning broke cold and brilliant, the kind of light that follows a blizzard, sharp, unforgiving, turning every surface into a mirror. I stepped outside in my boots and flannel coffee steaming in my hand and surveyed the transformed neighborhood. Golden timber estates looked like a war zone left to the mercy of winter. Tarps already flapped from damaged roofs like surrender flags. Orange caution tape fluttered around collapsed carports. Contractors' trucks idled in driveways, engines rumbling while men in Carhartt jackets pointed at sagging beams and shook their heads. Snowplows had carved narrow paths down the center of streets, pushing walls of white higher than my head. And at the heart of it all stood our house walls, half buried, but the roof a clean sweep of silver, catching the sun like a blade. Fresh slides from overnight had left perfect symmetrical fans of snow at the foundation edges, harmless and tidy. I hadn't slept much. After Karen's resignation, I'd sat at the kitchen table a long time staring at the letter under the warm glow of the generator lamp. Part of me felt vindicated. Most of me just felt tired. The first neighbor to approach was Greg. He trudged up the driveway, around 9 toolbox in hand, his son trailing behind with a thermos. "Thought we'd patch that cracked fence post on your east side," he said, nodding toward a split rail I hadn't even noticed in the chaos. "Least we can do." I studied him for a moment, the same man who'd avoided my eyes for months, and saw only quiet remorse. "Coffee first," I said, stepping aside. We drank it on the porch, breath fogging, watching contractors across the street measure a bowed ridge beam on the McCaffrey's house. "I voted against you at that emergency meeting," Greg admitted without preamble. "Was scared of being next. Scared of losing what we'd built here." I nodded. Fear makes people choose sides they don't believe in. He looked down at his boots. "You were right about everything. I see that now." "I didn't want to be right," I said. "I wanted to be wrong and have matching shingles like everybody else." He gave a short, rueful laugh. "Yeah, well, next time I'll listen sooner." We worked on the fence together in silence after that honest, companionable silence. His son passed nails and asked questions about snow load math. By noon, the post stood straight again. Word traveled fast in a neighborhood suddenly stripped of its pretenses. June Halstead's daughter emailed Amanda that afternoon her mother had slipped on attic meltwater and bruised her hip badly. Could we recommend a roofer who understood steep pitches? Amanda forwarded it to me with a single teary-eyed emoji. The McCaffreys left a note in a plastic bag on our porch, weighted with a rock against the wind. We were wrong. We see it now. Thank you for standing your ground. The roof you fought for saved more than your house. I folded it carefully and slipped it into the evidence binder, no longer evidence, just history. News crews arrived by early afternoon. A drone buzzed overhead, capturing aerial shots for the evening broadcast. I watched from the garage as a reporter in a bright blue parka interviewed the fire lieutenant I'd spoken to the day before. He gestured toward our roof more than once. That evening, the story led the local news. Homeowner defies HOA. Now his roof stands alone after historic blizzard. They showed drone footage block after block of crumpled structures, then a slow pan to our pristine silver slope. They aired clips from my security cameras, snow releasing in graceful, controlled waves, while neighbors' homes groaned and gave way. They quoted the county review committee, the fire department, even a snippet of David Hirsch saying the HOA's actions had been overreach, bordering on harassment. My phone began to ring. First, a reporter from Denver asking for comment. Then a podcast host wanting the full story. Then the county emergency preparedness office would I consult on updated building guidelines. I let most go to voicemail. Greg dropped by again after dinner with a six-pack and an apology pie his wife had baked. We sat in the living room generator, still humming softly. Karen's gone, he said quietly. Packed a bag and drove to her daughter's place up in Fort Collins. No one's heard from her since the resignation. I nodded. Some endings don't need commentary. By nightfall, the streetlights flickered back on power, restored at last. The neighborhood glowed under a fresh, peaceful quiet. I turned off the generator and listened to the house settle into ordinary silence. Amanda texted roads clearing tomorrow. Girls can't wait to come home. They keep telling everyone their daddy has the strongest roof in Colorado. I smiled and sent back a photo of the house, under the new moonlight, clean, unbroken, shining. Later, I stood on the back porch, in the cold coffee gone cold in my hand again. Footprints crisscrossed the snow, now neighbors, coming and going, borrowing tools, asking quiet questions about pitch angles and snow guards. The isolation had cracked open like thin ice, letting something tentative but real seep through. I thought about the sound I'd feared for so long, the deep groan of failure, and realized I hadn't heard it from my own roof once. Instead, I heard something new, doors opening, voices calling across driveways, the slow, careful sound of people remembering how to be neighbors again. Karen's resignation letter still sat on the kitchen counter. I would file it away tomorrow. Tonight, I just listened to the soft drip of melting snow from the eaves, steady, unhurried, certain. The storm had passed, and for the first time in months, the air felt clean. February slid into March with a reluctant thaw. Gray snowbanks shrank at the edges, revealing bent mailboxes and cracked sidewalks, like scars no one had bothered to hide. Contractors' trucks became a constant presence, hammering, sawing the low rumble of generators filling the air from dawn to dusk. But beneath the noise, something quieter was taking root. Change. It started small. A county engineer named Javier Fuentes knocked on my door one crisp morning, parka zipped to his chin clipboard, replaced by a tablet and a genuine smile. "We've been cataloging structural failures across the region," he said as I let him in. "Your roof's performance was exceptional. Mind if I take a closer look at the specs?" I spread the old blueprints across the kitchen table, the same ones I'd defended for months. Javier traced the pitch angles with his finger, nodded at the truss reinforcements, asked sharp questions about snow guard placement and attic ventilation. He didn't waste words. "You did this without an architect." "Army habits," I said. "Measure twice, overbuild once." He laughed. "Would you consider consulting on the state's updated winter residential guidelines? We're rewriting sections on snow load design. Your real-world data could save a lot of headaches and homes." I hesitated. Fame had never been the goal, but prevention, that I understood. "I'll do it," I said. "On one condition, focus on function, first aesthetics, second." Deal. Word of the county's interest spread faster than the thaw. Suddenly, my phone held messages from building inspectors, insurance adjusters, even a university professor teaching structural engineering. They all wanted the same thing, the story behind the silver roof that refused to break. The neighborhood felt the shift too. One Saturday afternoon, June Halstead's nephew showed up with a thermos of coffee and a sheepish grin. "Grandma's worried her new repairs won't hold next winter. Any chance you could glance at the plans?" I walked over with him. June sat on her porch, bundled in blankets, hips still tender from the fall. She met my eyes without flinching. "I was wrong to turn away from you and Amanda," she said quietly. "Fear's an ugly thing." I nodded. "It is." We spent an hour reviewing the contractor's drawings. I suggested steeper pitches on the rebuilt sections, better venting a few snow guards. June listened intently, knitting needles silent in her lap for once. The requests kept coming. The Carsons emailed detailed sketches of their rebuild, asking whether a 40-degree slope was enough. The McCaffreys invited me to walk their lot while framing went up wanting confirmation on truss spacing. Even families I barely knew stopped me during evening walks. "Garrett, quick question about metal versus shingles up here." I answered everyone. Not for gratitude, for the simple reason that no one else should wake to that groan in the dark. The biggest surprise came on a sunny Thursday when 20 neighbors filled the community center, folding chairs in a loose circle coffee urn, bubbling no clipboard in sight. Greg Hastings stood at the front looking uncomfortable in the role of interim president. "We'd like to learn," he said simply. "Whatever you're willing to teach about making our homes safer." I hadn't prepared a speech. I brought the blueprints, a laptop with storm footage, and my old Army presentation slides on load distribution. For 2 hours, I talked about pitch angles and wind drift ice dams, and ventilation, the math behind why steep works and shallow fails. I showed the time lapses, snow cascading off my roof in rhythmic waves, while others accumulated to the breaking point. They asked questions, real ones. No defensiveness, no side eyes. Just people who'd felt the ground shake under their feet and wanted to understand why one house stood untouched. June Halstead raised her hand near the end. "Could we make some of these changes community recommendations instead of rules?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Greg looked at me. "What do you think?" I thought of Karen's clipboard, her red blazer, the way fear had once turned neighbors into enforcers. "Recommendations, not mandates," I said. "Let people choose safety because it makes sense, not because they're afraid of fines." The vote was unanimous. Amanda came home permanently that weekend, the girls tumbling out of the car like puppies released from a crate. They ran straight to the backyard, squealing at the chickens, then pressed their faces to the windows to admire their roof as if seeing it for the first time. That night, we ate on the porch, take-out pizza, paper plates, the air finally soft enough to sit outside without coats. The girls recounted every detail of their adventure at Aunt Claire's. Amanda leaned against my shoulder, her hand resting on my knee. "You're different," she said later when the girls were asleep and we stood at the sink washing the few real dishes. "How?" "Calmer. Like you're not bracing for the next hit anymore." I dried a glass slowly. "Maybe because the hits stopped coming." She smiled. "Or maybe because you finally let yourself believe you won." A few days later, the county sent a formal letter, not a summons, not a violation, but a commendation on thick cream stock, signed by the Director of Emergency Preparedness. Inside was a plaque-polished wood brass plate, engraved with words about foresight and community resilience. I hung it in the garage, low on the wall, where only I would see it each morning. Not for pride, for reminder. Because somewhere out there another subdivision was drawing up covenants that prized curb appeal over survival. Another family was being told their safe choice was non-compliant. Another Karen was measuring power in uniformity. But maybe, just maybe, one of them would hear about a stubborn ex-soldier in northern Colorado who refused to back down. And maybe that would be enough to make them think twice. Amanda found me in the garage staring at the plaque one evening. "You saved more than our roof," she said softly, echoing words she'd spoken months earlier. This time I believed her. I pulled her close, breathing in the faint scent of spring in her hair. Outside contractors' hammers echoed down the street, new pitches rising, old mistakes being undone, one truss at a time. The neighborhood was healing, and for the first time since we'd moved in, it felt like home. April arrived like a quiet apology. The last stubborn patches of snow finally surrendered to warm sun and steady rain running off in rivulets that carved tiny rivers down the curbs. Rooftops across golden timber estates began to change shape, gentle slopes giving way to sharper angles, brown shingles replaced by metal in silvers and deep greens. Contractors no longer just repaired, they re-engineered. Snow guards glinted on new ridges. Attic vents multiplied like thoughtful afterthoughts. The neighborhood held its first truly open HOA election in years. No backroom deals, no acclamation, just ballots in the community center, and neighbors lingering afterward to talk instead of rushing away. Amanda ran for treasurer on a platform of transparency and emergency preparedness. She won in a landslide. Greg Hastings accepted the presidency with visible reluctance, but unmistakable honesty. In his short acceptance speech, he thanked his son for teaching him to look up to the right people again, and then he looked straight at me. I didn't run for anything. Power had never been the point. But when they asked me to serve as permanent advisor on structural safety and disaster planning, I agreed on one unbreakable condition. No rule will ever again put aesthetics above human life. The motion passed without a single dissenting voice. The old covenants were gutted, rewritten from the ground up. Fines for visual deviations vanished. In their place came guidelines, voluntary, flexible, rooted in engineering rather than ego. The word uniformity appeared nowhere in the new document. Karen Delaney's name disappeared from every official record as quietly as she had left town. No one spoke ill of her anymore. The storm had done that work for us. Walking the streets felt different now. Kids zipped past on scooters again, shouting hellos. June Halstead waved from her porch rocker and called me her storm-proof neighbor with a wink. Greg and his wife invited us for barbecues where the talk was about baseball and school fundraisers, not violations. Even the newest families stopped me to ask about roof pitches before they closed on their lots. I accepted the greetings, returned the waves, but part of me stayed watchful. Wounds like those don't vanish with the snow. Some nights I still caught myself listening for the groan of failing timber or scanning the horizon for the next gray SUV. Amanda sensed it. One late April evening, we sat on the porch swing watching fireflies blink on in the softening dusk. The girls' laughter drifted from the backyard where they chased each other through the new grass. "You're waiting for the other shoe to drop," she said softly. Maybe I admitted, old habits. She slipped her hand into mine. Not every storm comes to destroy. Some come to wash things clean. I looked at the roof above us, silver panels catching the last light of day, clean and unburdened. Then at the houses around us, their new lines rising stronger, wiser. Across the street, Greg's fresh metal roof flashed the same quiet defiance as mine. June's rebuilt addition sported a steeper pitch and gleaming snow guards. One by one, the neighborhood had chosen survival over sameness. A week later, the plaque from the Colorado Office of Emergency Preparedness arrived, polished walnut brass lettering. I hung it low in the garage eye level with the workbench where I'd once spread blueprints in desperation. The engraving read, "In recognition of Garrett Weller, whose foresight, integrity, and engineering excellence prevented greater loss during the February blizzard and inspired lasting community resilience." I didn't show it around. I didn't need to. One Sunday morning in early May, I stood alone in the backyard, coffee cooling in my hand, listening to the chickens cluck and the distant hum of lawnmowers. The air smelled of cut grass and lilacs just beginning to bloom. Amanda and the girls were still asleep inside. Lucy had taped a new drawing to the fridge the night before, a big silver triangle roof with stick figures underneath Mommy, Daddy, Molly, Lucy. Even the chickens labeled in careful 6-year-old letters, "Best roof ever." I smiled at the memory, then looked up at the real thing above me. It had done its job. Not just holding snow, but holding a line I could not cross. I thought back to that endless night in the blizzard, 3:14 a.m. The first distant crack, the cries for help in the dark. I thought of every letter, every cold shoulder, every red-painted threat. And I thought of the quiet morning after when doors began to open again. The fight hadn't been about a roof. It had been about remembering what rules are supposed to protect and what happens when we forget. Amanda appeared in the doorway, then robe wrapped tight against the morning chill, hair tousled from sleep. She patted across the dew-wet grass and slipped her arms around me from behind. "Thinking about the storm again." "Always," I said. She rested her chin on my shoulder. "Lucy told her teacher you're a superhero who fights bad rules." I chuckled. "Not the worst reputation." "You earned it," she whispered and kissed the side of my neck. We stood there a long time watching the sun climb higher, gilding the roof one more time. Later that month, I spoke at the State Infrastructure Summit. Nothing dramatic, just facts, footage, and the simple truth. Nature doesn't negotiate with covenants. A few HOAs in the audience shifted uncomfortably. Good. But the real victory was quieter, closer to home. One warm evening in June, Amanda and I lay in bed with the windows open, the first real breath of summer drifting through the screens. Crickets sang. Somewhere down the street, a barbecue smoked and laughter rose. She turned to me in the dark. "Is it really over?" I listened to the gentle creak of the house, settling the soft sigh of wind through new leaves. "Not over," I said. "Just different now." She smiled against my shoulder. "Different is good." I closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, didn't brace against the night. Outside, under a vast Colorado sky, The last trace of winter gleamed for a moment on the highest ridge, then slipped quietly away, just as it was always meant to do.